Hey there, boys and girls. Welcome back to Mr. Herring's fifth grade social studies. Today we're still moving on with our Unit 7, the U.S. as a world power. Today we're going to talk about the progressive era, the reform and reformers. Now remember, reform is one of our vocabulary terms for this unit. Uh, Reform meaning to make a change for the better. And like I said before, when I think about making changes, I always think about the amendments and how they were changes to the better or for the better to the Constitution. But yeah, that's what we're going to talk about today. Today, I can analyze the impact of the progressive era on Americans. What are three reforms that helped change the way Americans live for the better? Now, there are lots and lots of reforms that were made during the progressive era, especially now, we're really going to focus on the Northeast. That's where most of the reform took place. Remember that at this time, the South is still kind of disregarded. They've been forgotten. They're really still not on uh, pace to be reconciled and get caught up, and they're still pretty far behind. So most of what we're talking about now is the Northeast. All right, so let's go ahead and get started. In my Schoology page, you're going to find several videos. They are really, really good videos that describe the progressive era. I need you to watch all of them. The first one is the progressive era, the progressives and their programs, which is a detailed video about several progressives in this era. The second video in the Schoology is the child labor during the Gilded Age. Now, you might know prior to the reform, all children, many children went to work in factories to support their families, help support their families, and they were working incredibly dangerous jobs. Like this picture suggests here, that they're on looms up there in the textile mills, no shoes on, and it's just extremely dangerous. And these are very young children. This is one of the most famous pictures. In one of the videos, you're going to see this picture. Um, a gentleman named Reese went around and photographed some of the circumstances of our country at the time and made a lot of money on his book, full of photographs that got the progressive era really moving, got people moved and angry about the conditions of things that were going on. They like to think they didn't know, but much like Uncle Tom's Cabin, people acting like they didn't really know how bad slavery was. Well, this is much the same. People didn't admit that they really knew just how awful it was for the children in our country. And so this picture kind of sets the tone and gets things rolling for the progressive reform of child labor. Then, of course, you're going to find one in there about the jungle, the book The Jungle, that describes the meatpacking industry. I definitely need you to watch that video because remember, the meatpacking industry is where Henry Ford, one of our biggest inventors of the assembly line, gets his idea for the assembly line. There's another picture of that assembly line. This is how the beef was taken apart as it went down the table from one person to the next. And I don't want to spoil your fun. You need to watch that video for sure. Um, and this goes with the movie about the book The Jungle. In New York City, especially Chicago, in those big rural areas, you had a huge rodent problem, and so you'll find out the question of what did they do with all the rodents in those industries and in those areas. This is the book, The Jungle, written by a man named Upton Sinclair, that video in the Schoology page is based on. It's an incredible book. He infiltrates as a spy, so to speak, the industries that were really, really nasty. He is definitely one of the muckrakers in his own right, probably one of the most significant muckrakers of his time. And this, of course, is Mr. Teddy Roosevelt. Um, this cartoon, this propaganda, it's 100% propaganda, but it kind of shows how he felt about the meatpacking industry, how there's a huge scandal and how things are being done in the meatpacking industry. And he set forth an investigation, and he was a very, very arrogant man. Claimed that he was going to single-handedly clean up the meatpacking industry. Of course, he also put in place or put the idea in place to set antitrust laws to break up these huge monopolies by people like Rockefeller, Carnegie, Morgan, things like that. But the meatpacking industry was one of his biggest causes. So here's the note page. It is in the Schoology page, or if you can print it out, great. You can print it out and fill it in while you're working, or if not, when you get back to class, make sure you see me, and we'll get one for you for your notes. All right, so let's go ahead and get started. So the Progressive Era, Reform and Reformers. So muckrakers, we know, are the journalists who wrote stories exposing the corruption in politics and in business. They didn't stop just in society. They went after the politicians too, because there was a lot of corruptness in the politicians' arena. And the muckrakers are those people who did that work. They exposed all the muck, so to speak. In the Reform era, the Progressive era, in this Gilded Age, we talked about, the picture we showed in class about how the other half lived. You were either very, very wealthy or very, very poor. This is a picture of the floor plan of a tenement. Now, a tenement was like an apartment building, but the apartment buildings were very, very unique. If you look here, this is 50 feet long, okay? Twice as long as my classroom, and it's cut into 4 pieces. So you're looking at less than 25 feet because you have a public hall in the middle there, which is probably 10 to 12 feet. So you're looking at 40 feet. So each one of those buildings are about 20 feet long. And if you look at them, they've got a parlor, a living room, a bedroom, and a bedroom. There's a public hall down the middle to access all 4 buildings, all 4 rooms. And this is how the people lived in the north, in the big booming cities. This tenement was a building that has been divided into many small apartments because the people who owned it knew they could make more money if they divided it into smaller parts. So you would have very, very large families living in these little bitty tenements. Some are bigger than others. Some have multiple bedrooms. Some only have 1 bedroom. But you would have multiple families living in these little bitty tenements, and there'll be some pictures of this in the videos that you watch. Also in the Progressive Era and Reform, we get something called the Hull House. This was a settlement house called the Hull House for needy and poor immigrants in Chicago area, established by a lady named Jane Addams. What she would do is take in immigrants and the poor, help feed them, give them a place to stay, help them get back on their feet, train them, teach them how to read, things like that, until they could find work and then move out onto their own. She didn't segregate or discriminate against any color, gender. She let anybody in, and she helped as many people as she possibly could. The Jungle, like I showed you a picture of, this book comes out. A very famous muckraker by the name of Upton Sinclair publishes a book called The Jungle in 1906. Now, this book comes out and it exposes the very dangerous conditions in the meatpacking industry. And this video, the meatpacking industry, will be in the Schoology folder for Thursday, and you definitely want to watch that. It's an excerpt from the book. When you get to high school, I strongly recommend you read the book because it's a very interesting book. We take for granted the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration that we have today, that has things in place that prevent disgusting activities from happening in places of business where they deal with food and medicines and things. Didn't have that during this era, and so there were some really nasty things going on. Of course, in the Progressive Era, we get the 18th Amendment, which brings about prohibition. Prohibition prohibits the manufacturing and distribution of alcohol products. This was a big, big problem. And what the 18th Amendment does is it leads to the biggest form of organized crime in American history to date at this point. Some of the really big crime bosses come out of the Prohibition time. Of course, Bugsy Siegel, Al Capone. I mean, the real big ones come out because they do something called bootlegging alcohol, which they make it illegally and they sell it illegally, and it's a huge, huge problem. But the 18th Amendment bans alcohol, and there are some great videos in the Schoology about the 18th Amendment concerning the 18th Amendment and Prohibition. During the Progressive Era and the Reform Era, we have Teddy Roosevelt, who passed something called the Meat Inspection and Food and Drug Acts to make our food and medicines more safe. Today we call the Food and Drug Administration. We learned about that and talked about that during the preamble, if you remember. One of the lines in the preamble, to take care of the citizens, make sure they're healthy, and the FDA is what comes about from that. And the Meat and Food and Drug Acts are what start the FDA. He really attacks the meatpacking industry. He makes an example of them to prevent anybody else from, I guess, conducting business in the way that they did. And like I said, if when you watch that video, you're going to see why. But Teddy Roosevelt is the one that gets that kind of a thing started. He was a bullheaded man. He did not like inequality. He did not like the way that Americans were treated, even though he was kind of a bully himself. He didn't really take care of Americans, especially Americans in the poorer side. Today, it's hard to, people would argue he'd be a Democrat, a very liberal person. But then I could easily see people, complaining about him being conservative. He would go and he almost threatened a world war over a citizen he thought was an American citizen in Morocco, that was being held against his will, only to find out that he wasn't even an American citizen. So that was a very conservative move. But a very, very, I thought, a fair man, just a very, arrogant man, loved to hunt and fish and things like that. But he did attack big businesses for what he called were unfair and poor treatment of Americans. Out of the Reform era, we also get Miss Susan B. Anthony. This is a woman who literally dies on the hill of fighting for voting rights for women. You remember suffrage? This specifically is talking about women's suffrage. And from this century, we get the 19th Amendment, which finally grants the women to vote in the year 1920. They've been fighting for it for some time. There's hundreds of protests, and women are treated really, really poorly because of the protests. They go to prison, they're arrested, they refuse to eat, they're force fed. Some really bad things come out of it, but there's a great video in that Schoology page about women's suffrage. Please make sure you watch that. And again, Susan B. Anthony she kind of gets credit for leading the charge, even though there were many women just like her. But she gets the most attention because she drew the most attention during that era. Okay, this is the note page you should have. At the conclusion, you'll have this. Make sure you have all this filled in. Again, if you don't have ability to print, make sure you see me when you get back to class, and I'll give one for your journal. All right. When I talk about innovation and invention, these are the things that we need to know about for the upcoming Open Note quiz on Friday. The steam engines, the phonograph, incandescent, the movie, assembly line, interchangeable parts, Model T, motels, suburbs, Thomas Edison, transcontinental means across the continent, deaf means lack of hearing, electricity, we know it comes from Edison, and of course Alexander Graham Bell, and the telegraph with Mr. Morse. All of these things will be on that Open Note quiz. These are some things that we need to be aware of when we're talking about innovation and invention. Okay? All right. As a reflection, I would encourage you to look back and think back. What are some of the biggest reforms that come out of this era after watching the videos and listening to the slideshow that really improve the way Americans live the most? Because in this era, we get a huge increase in the improvement of American lives. And after this era, it really just continues. People go beyond the Call of Duty to make sure American lives are not only healthier, safer, but even better. Sometimes it's good, sometimes it's not so good. But think about that, reflect on what is it in this era what do you think made our lives so much better during this period? All right? All right, hope to see you guys back in class. Other than that, have a fabulous day. We'll see you on the flip side.